So in this lecture, we are going to use state in order to display and hide the form the React way. So let's come back here, remove the counter from here because we no longer need it. All right, so here is where we include this fact form. And so now we want to basically toggle the visibility based on clicking this button. So how could we do this? Well, it's actually not so difficult. All we need is one state variable, and that state variable can be either true or false. And then depending on whether it is true or false, we will display this form or not. So let me show you what I mean. So here in the app, let me create a state variable. And here I will immediately start the destructuring. So this state variable we are going to call showForm and set showForm. Okay, and use state again, and then the default value. So let's start with false, which means that right now we do not want to show the form. So now all we need to do is to use this variable in order to actually show the form or not. And for that, we can now use the ternary operator. So that's why we learned so much about it before, because the ternary operator is very crucial in React to use conditional rendering. So basically rendering something based on a condition. Now in this case, there would actually be a better tool for doing that, but I don't want to complicate and confuse you even more. So in order to use the ternary operator, we need to step back into JavaScript. So that's the curly braces. And now we can simply say show form. And since this is already a Boolean value, so it's already a true or false, we don't need to write any condition. So just this variable here is already a condition. So if this is true, then, well, then we want new fact form. But if not, then we want nothing. And so that's null. And remember again that null is one of the basic data types in JavaScript. So null is basically like nothing. It's like the absence of anything. So let's give it a save. And just with this, now the form is gone. And we can see that also here in our component tree. So right now the form is no longer there, really. So it's as if that component really doesn't exist. Now that's again because showForm is right now false, because that's the initial state of showForm. And yeah, then what we return here is null. And null will not display anything. Now if we click here on app, then down here we can see state. And it says here hooks because useState is a so-called hook. That's not really important. So what I wanted to show you is that here we can actually manipulate this value. So a little bit like we can also manipulate CSS here in the Elements tab. So I can now toggle this here by clicking this checkbox, and then it will become true. So now it's true, and then the form is visible. And so that's because right now this show form has been changed to true, and then in the ternary operator, this first part here is true, and so then this code here will run. So it will show us the form, because remember that each time that the state is updated, the entire function, so the entire component function will be executed again, but with the new state, right? So remember that from the last lecture. Now, of course, we do not want to go into the dev tools in order to toggle the form. So in order basically to toggle the state. Instead, we want that to happen whenever we click here on this button. So where is that button? Well, it's right here, a share effect. And so let's add an event handler right here, just like we did in the previous lecture, using the onClick attribute, let's say. And again, here we need a function without any parameters. Okay, and then we use our setter function. So set show form, and then for now let's just set it to true. Okay, let's try that. And yeah, now it is true and the form is visible. However, when we click here again, then that will still become true. Or actually it will remain true because all we're doing here is to simply always set it to true. However, when it is already true, we want it to be false. So we want the opposite here. So what that means is that just like in the counter, we want to set the new state based on the current state. So what we need to do here is to read the current state. So again, we need a callback function here now. And so let's just call that one show. So in parentheses. And now here comes a logical operator that we haven't learned about yet. So let me show it to you. So this exclamation mark is called the not operator. And basically what the not operator does is to return the opposite of the current Boolean. So let me show that to you here in the console, just so it makes a bit more sense. So when we write true, then we get true, right? But if we write not true, then we get false, which is the opposite. And the same way, if we write not false, then we get true. So basically, it always returns the opposite of the current Boolean. And so that's exactly what we want. So if we save this now, then true becomes false, and false becomes true, and so on and so forth. So great, that works just fine. What did I do here? Yeah, here we are back. So let's recap again what happened. So we created our state variable here using the useState function, or the useState hook, as it's also called. And then whenever we click on the button, this function here gets called. And what happens then is that the showForm variable will be set to the opposite of the current value. So that's what we did here using the not operator. And one thing that's really important to emphasize here is that here in the onClick, we really need a function. So that's why we always start with this empty parenthesis here and the arrow, because this function here is what React will call whenever the click happened. So if instead we did this, here, for example, then that would not work because React would immediately call this function right here, right? Because this is just a function call. It's not a function. So this here is a function, right? Here we are just calling a function. So that's fundamentally different, and it's important to keep in mind. Now you might be wondering why we need to do all of this, why we cannot just, for example, create let show equal true, and then simply at some point here change that variable. So we could then maybe do show equals false, but that really would not work at all, because by doing so, we would not telling React to re-render the component. Okay, so only by using the setShowForm function, so only by using a state setter function, we are telling React to update the state and to run the entire component again. So to re-render the component. So this is just normal JavaScript, and so that is not enough here in our case. Let's just go back. We don't need any of this. And so hopefully this made sense to you. Yeah, and of course here we are then conditionally rendering this component based on whether we actually want to show it or not. So these are always the three parts of using state. Let me write that. Define state variable. Then use state variable. And then right here is update state variable. And so these are the three things that we do with the state variables. So as a conclusion to this lecture, whenever we need something to change on the screen, what we want is to re-render the screen. And the only way in which we can re-render a screen is by updating state. And so the conclusion is that whenever something needs to change on the screen, then we need a state variable.